Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going deep into the world of dental materials. We're talking about the stuff that makes our smiles, well, smile-worthy.
That's right.
And we're not just talking about the shiny new stuff either. We're going all the way back in time, folks. Back to the, shall we say, more primitive days of dentistry,
Oh, absolutely.
when people used, get this, seashells and animal teeth to replace their missing chompers. Can you imagine?
Oh, it's true. The things they used back then, you wouldn't believe it. And it really goes to show how far we've come in understanding not just teeth, but, the whole science of the human body.
Yeah, talk about a blast from the past. I mean, I read that even mummies from ancient Egypt, way back in 2500 BCE, had evidence of abscesses and gum disease. Like, those are problems we still deal with today.
Exactly. It shows that dental problems aren't exactly a modern invention. People have been struggling with toothaches and gum issues for millennia, literally.
So what did they do about it back then? Like, did they have, I don't know, ancient tooth fairies or something?
Haha, not quite. But we have found evidence of early dental practices, like using toothpicks. Believe it or not, we've even found toothpicks in human fossils dating back, get this, 1.77 million years.
Wow, that puts my fancy electric toothbrush to shame. But I'm guessing those early attempts at dental care were, well, pretty basic, right? When did things start to get a little more scientific?
You're right. Those early methods were, let's just say they had their limitations.
Yeah.
Restorative dentistry, as we know it today, didn't really take shape until the mid-1800s.
Really? That late?
It's true. Before that, it was basically all about pulling teeth. If you had a toothache, well, out it came.
Ouch. I'll take a filling any day, thank you very much. So once people started, actually trying to save teeth instead of just yanking them out, what did they use for replacements besides those seashells and animal teeth you mentioned?
Well, porcelain teeth were a big breakthrough in the late 1700s.
Porcelain, like stuff teacups are made of.
That's right. They were much more aesthetically pleasing and more durable than the materials that were used before that. And porcelain teeth were really the beginning of what we know today as dentures.
Wow, from seashells to porcelain, that's quite a journey. But I've heard some pretty crazy stories about early dental materials. Like, wasn't there a time when they used mercury in fillings?
Oh, yeah, that's the infamous Amalgam War of the 1800s. And let me tell you, it was a wild time in dentistry. They were using silver shavings, like from coins, mixed with mercury to make fillings. Can you believe that?
Mercury in
Yeah.
people's mouths. That sounds downright dangerous.
It was a different time. Back then, they didn't really understand how toxic mercury could be, but it really highlights how crucial scientific research and, evidence-based practice are in dentistry.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, in 1895, a dentist named G.V. Black developed a much better and safer amalgam formula, and that's actually what led to the silver fillings that we know today.
So those silver fillings I had as a kid were a product of the Amalgam War. Wow, history is full of surprises. But what about other dental materials? Did they all have such dramatic origins?
Not all of them know, but the history of dental materials is full of innovation. Like, take zinc oxide cement, for instance. It was introduced in 1907, but guess what they originally used it for? Cementing tiles.
You're kidding. So our teeth and our floors have something in common.
That's right. It just goes to show that, sometimes materials have surprising applications.
Totally. So what about those tooth-colored fillings we have today? When did those come along?
Those came about thanks to synthetic resins, which were introduced in 1932. They really changed everything. They're what make up most composite restorations today.
So it's like each new material kind of built upon the successes or maybe even failures of the ones that came before it.
You got it. It's been an incredible journey, and, it's led us to the amazing options we have available today.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come in dentistry. But it's not just about fixing teeth that are already damaged, right? Prevention plays a huge role too.
Oh, absolutely. Preventive dentistry is a cornerstone of modern dental care. And, the development of preventative materials has been just as important as the development of restorative materials.
Yeah, like fluoride in toothpaste and those sealant things they put on kids' teeth. Those are relatively new, right?
Well, actually, the idea of using fluoride to prevent cavities goes all the way back to 1874. It's remarkable how some ideas take, decades or even centuries to fully develop and be adopted.
1874.
Really? Yep. But it was a dentist named Frederick McKay who really got the ball rolling. He was working in Colorado Springs back in 1901 and noticed something called dental fluorosis.
Dental fluorosis. What's that?
It's basically when people have too much fluoride during tooth development, and it causes these white spots or streaks on their teeth.
So too much fluoride is a bad thing.
It can be, yeah. But McKay noticed something interesting. The people with dental fluorosis, even though their teeth had those white marks, they also had way fewer cavities.
Ah, so that's what sparked the whole fluoride revolution.
Exactly. It took a lot of research and testing, but eventually the first community water fluoridation program started in 1945.
Wow, just think about how many people have benefited from that discovery. But all this talk about the history of dental materials is fascinating. But why should we, as patients, care about this stuff?
That's a great question. The truth is, understanding dental materials is really important for anyone who cares about their oral health. Whether you're curious about the type of filling you have, or the material used in your crown, or even just your toothpaste, having a basic understanding can help you make more informed decisions about your dental care.
So it's not just about leaving it all up to the dentist. We can actually be active participants in our own care.
Exactly. The more you know about the materials that are being used in your mouth, the better you can communicate with your dentist. Ask the right questions, understand the pros and cons of different treatment options, and ultimately make the best choices for your individual needs and preferences.
It's like being an informed consumer, but for your teeth.
Precisely.
So let's dive into the world of dental materials from a patient's perspective. What are some key things we should know?
Well, it's a complicated field, but the basics are pretty simple. It's really about understanding what these materials are, how they work in your mouth, and how to take care of them.
Okay, so why is studying dental materials such a big deal? I mean, isn't it the dentist's job to know all that stuff?
Of course, your dentist should be an expert on dental materials, but understanding the basics can help you have a better conversation with your dentist and make more informed decisions.
I see.
For instance, if your dentist says you need a specific type of filling, you can ask them what it's made of, how long it will last, if there are any risks or benefits to consider, that kind of thing.
Right. So it's about being an active participant in the conversation, not just blindly following whatever the dentist says.
Exactly.
But with all the different materials and techniques out there, where do we even begin?
Well, let's start by thinking about the ideal characteristics of any dental material. First and foremost, it needs to be biocompatible.
Biocompatible.
That means it won't harm your body or your tissues.
Okay.
And ideally, it should also look good, especially if it's visible in your smile. And of course, it needs to be durable. It's got to stand up to all that chewing and biting we do every day.
It's like a wish list for your mouth fine. Biocompatible, beautiful, and built to last. But with all the new technology and products coming out all the time, how do we know what's truly effective?
That's where evidence-based dentistry comes in. It's all about using scientific evidence to guide decision-making, making sure the materials and techniques being used are backed by solid research and have a proven track record.
So it's not just about following the latest fad or believing those flashy advertisements.
Definitely not. Evidence-based dentistry is about making informed choices based on real science. Your dentist should be able to explain the research behind the materials and treatments they recommend.
That's a really good point. How can we, as patients, make sure our dentists are actually practicing evidence-based dentistry?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. If your dentist recommends a specific material or treatment, ask them what the evidence is to support its use. Are there studies? Are there known risks or side effects? That sort of thing.
So it's about having an open dialogue and really understanding what's going on in your mouth.
Exactly.
But it can be hard to keep up with all the different materials and techniques out there. What are some good resources we can turn to for reliable information?
Well, the American Dental Association, the ADA, is a great place to start. Their website has a ton of information for patients.
Oh yeah, the ADA. They're like the gold standard for dental information. Right.
Pretty much. And they also have this seal of acceptance program for consumer dental products. So if you see the ADA seal on your toothpaste or toothbrush, it means it's met their standards for safety and effectiveness.
So it's like a stamp of approval that helps us navigate all the choices out there.
Exactly. It can be really helpful, especially when you're standing in the dental aisle and feeling overwhelmed by all the options.
Okay, so the ADA is a good resource for patients, but what about regulations? I mean, who's making sure all these dental materials are actually safe for us to, put in our mouths?
That's where the U.S. Food and Drug Administration comes in, the FDA.
The FDA. I feel like they're involved in just about everything we eat and use these days.
They are. They're a really important agency, and they play a huge role in regulating the safety and efficacy of dental materials. They actually classify medical and dental devices into 3 categories based on the level of risk.
Risk level. So some dental materials are considered riskier than others.
That's right. Class I devices are the lowest risk. Things like gloves, prophy paste, over-the-counter dental products, they're subject to what we call general controls. Things like good manufacturing practices.
So that's kind of like the baseline, the bare minimum that any dental practice should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have Class 2 devices.
Which are?
Those are considered a moderate risk. Things like amalgam restorations, which are your classic silver fillings, and composite restorations, the tooth-colored ones. Those have to meet specific performance standards set by the FDA or the ADA.
So there's a higher level of scrutiny for those because it's going to be in your mouth for a long time, right?
Exactly. And finally, you have Class 3 devices.
What are they?
Those are the highest risk. Things like implants, bone grafting material.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Those are things that are actually implanted into your jawbone, so they have a much bigger impact on your overall health.
Yeah. It makes sense that those would have the strictest regulations.
Right. And those Class 3 devices actually need pre-market approval from the FDA. So they go through a lot of testing and clinical trials to make sure they're safe and effective.
So there are a lot of safeguards in place to protect us from, well, ending up with something harmful in our mouths.
Absolutely. And understanding these classifications can help you appreciate the level of scrutiny that goes into dental materials.
For sure. It's good to know that someone's looking out for us.
And it's important to choose a dentist who is knowledgeable about these regulations and committed to using safe and effective products.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from ancient dental practices to modern-day regulations. But let's be real, most of us don't think much about dental materials until we're actually sitting in the dental chair.
That's true.
But even those routine procedures like getting a filling or a crown, they involve a whole lot of science and technology behind the scenes. And one of the most common procedures that really highlights the importance of dental materials is taking impressions.
Oh yeah, impressions.
Those gooey trays that they use to get a mold of your teeth. I remember those as a kid. Not always the most pleasant experience.
I know, right? But impressions are essential for so many dental procedures, from diagnostics to making models for restorations and appliances.
So they're kind of like a blueprint for your mouth.
Exactly. They capture the unique shape of your teeth and gums, which allows your dentist to personalize your dental care. And there are actually different types of impression materials, each with their own properties and uses.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Nope, not at all. The type of impression material used depends on the specific procedure and the level of detail required.
Makes sense. So what are some of the different types of impression materials out there?
Well, one of the most common ones is alginate. It's a type of irreversible hydrocolloid.
Irreversible hydrocolloid. That sounds pretty technical. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. It's basically a mixture where tiny particles are suspended in water. And irreversible means that once it sets, it undergoes a chemical reaction and can't be reversed back to its liquid state.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like making dough once you bake it. You can't turn it back into flour and water.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And that property is what makes alginate so useful for impressions. It captures the shape of your teeth and then sets into this firm, rubbery material that can be removed without distorting the details.
So alginate is like the go-to for impressions.
It is for a lot of things. It's great for making those initial models, the ones they use to assess your overall oral health and plan treatment. And it's also commonly used for making temporary restorations, like temporary crowns or bridges or simple orthodontic appliances.
So it's good for those initial steps, but I'm guessing it's not accurate enough for, like, permanent crowns or bridges.
You're right. For those kinds of restorations, we need materials that are more precise, more dimensionally stable. Alginate is great for getting a general idea of the shape of your teeth, but for things like crowns and bridges, we need to capture every tiny detail.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like the difference between a rough sketch and a detailed blueprint.
That's a great way to put it. And for those highly precise procedures, we use elastomeric impression materials.
Elastomeric.
Yeah, elastomeric. They're basically rubbery materials that can be stretched or deformed and then bounce back to their original shape.
Okay, so like elastic.
Exactly. And that elasticity is really important for impressions because it allows the material to be removed from your mouth without distorting the delicate details of your teeth and gums.
Oh, I see. So it's like a super accurate mold.
You got it. And there are actually different types of elastomeric impression materials, each with its own pros and cons.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the most common ones?
Well, one of the oldest ones is polysulfide, which is sometimes called mercaptan rubber. It's been around for a long time, and it's known for its accuracy and tear strength.
Tear strength.
Yeah, think about those tight spaces between your teeth, those delicate gum lines.
Right.
The material has to be strong enough to withstand the forces of being removed from your mouth without tearing or distorting.
Got it. So polysulfide is tough and accurate, but are there any downsides to using it?
It does have a bit of an unpleasant taste and smell.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah, some patients find it off-putting, and it can also stain clothing, so we have to be careful when handling it.
Okay, so not the most patient-friendly material then?
Well, in terms of smell and taste, no. But its accuracy and durability make it a valuable tool for certain procedures.
I see. So what about some other options? Are there elastomeric materials that are, let's say, a bit more pleasant to encounter?
Well, silicone impression materials are a popular choice because they offer a good balance of accuracy, patient comfort, and ease of use. And there are actually two main types of silicone impression materials: condensation silicones and addition silicones.
Two types. What's the difference between them?
Condensation silicones were the first type of silicone to be used for impressions, and they're still widely used today, especially for crowns and bridges.
Okay, so they've stood the test of time. And what are they like?
They come in a variety of consistencies, from putty-like to more fluid, so dentists can choose the best one for the specific impression they need.
So they're pretty versatile, but are there any drawbacks to condensation silicones?
One potential downside is that they release a byproduct called ethyl alcohol during the setting process.
Ethyl alcohol.
It can cause a slight shrinkage of the impression, which can sometimes affect the accuracy of the final restoration.
So it's not always a perfect replica.
It's usually a very small amount of shrinkage, but it's something we have to consider when using condensation silicones.
I see. So accuracy is always a concern when it comes to impressions. What about those addition silicones? Do they have the same shrinkage problem?
Addition silicones are considered a more advanced type of silicone, and they actually don't produce any byproducts during the setting process.
Wow, it's pretty cool.
So they're highly accurate and very dimensionally stable.
So they're like the gold standard.
You could say that, and they're also very clean and easy to use, no strong odor or taste.
Okay, so addition silicones sound like a win-win, accurate, stable, and patient-friendly. But I'm guessing there's a catch.
Well, the main downside is that they tend to be more expensive than condensation silicones.
Oh, there it is.
So it's a cost-benefit analysis. But for those procedures that demand the highest level of accuracy, the extra cost is often justified.
So it's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Are there any other types of elastomeric impression materials we should know about?
There's also polyester, which is another excellent choice for impressions, especially for crowns and bridges. It's known for its high accuracy and its hydrophilicity.
Hydrophilicity, that sounds complicated.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. It basically means it likes water.
Oh, okay. And why is that important?
Because our mouths are a pretty wet environment.
Uh-huh, good point.
That affinity for water allows polyether to capture those fine details even in the presence of saliva and moisture, which can be a problem for some other materials.
So it's like a water-loving material that's not afraid of a little spit.
Exactly.
Are there any downsides to using polyether?
It can be a bit stiff, which can make it a little harder to remove from the mouth, especially in areas with undercuts or tight spaces.
So it's accurate, but maybe not the easiest to work with?
That's right. And it also has a shorter working and setting time compared to some other elastomers, so we have to work pretty quickly when using it.
Okay, so polyether is for the skilled and speedy dentist.
Haha, you could say that. But when used correctly, it can produce some incredibly accurate impressions.
We've covered a lot of ground just on impression materials. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have to ask about digital impressions.
Ah, yes. Digital impressions.
They're totally changing the game in dentistry. It's like we've gone from seashells to digital scanners.
I know, it's amazing. And they really are revolutionizing the way we take impressions, making the experience more accurate, more efficient, and more comfortable for patients.
Okay, so no more gooey trays, sign me up. But how do they actually work?
Well, instead of using those traditional trays, digital impressions use a handheld scanner to take a 3D image of your teeth and gums.
So it's like a 3D camera for your mouth.
Pretty much. It takes a series of pictures that are then put together by a computer to create a super detailed virtual model.
Wow, that's futuristic.
Yeah.
So no more messy trays, no more unpleasant tastes.
In most cases, no. And the accuracy is incredible.
And accuracy is key for those restorations to fit properly.
Exactly. But it's not just about accuracy, it's also about efficiency.
Okay, tell me more.
Remember how we talked about those traditional impressions having to be sent to a lab and there's that waiting period for the models to be created?
Yeah.
Well, with digital impressions, the dentist can just send the digital file to the lab electronically.
Wow.
And then the models are created using CAD/CAM technology.
CAD/CAM, like computer-aided design and manufacturing.
That's right. So the turnaround time is much faster for patients, and there's less back and forth between the dentist and the lab.
So it's a win-win for everyone involved. More accurate restorations, faster turnaround times, and a less messy experience for patients. But I bet all this fancy technology comes with a hefty price tag.
You're not wrong. The initial cost for dental practices to get set up with the digital impression systems can be a bit steep. But the good news is that the prices are coming down as the technology becomes more widespread.
So it's becoming more accessible.
Definitely. And I think we're going to see digital impressions becoming the norm in the coming years.
That's pretty exciting. It seems like technology is really changing the face of dentistry, making things better for both patients and dentists.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of dental materials. We've gone from ancient remedies to cutting-edge technology, and it's amazing to see how far we've come.
It really is. And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore. And in our next segment, we're going to dive even deeper into the practical side of dental materials. We'll talk about pouring gypsum models, troubleshooting those pesky problems that can pop up, and really uncover the secrets behind the materials that help keep our smiles healthy and bright.
Okay, I can't wait.
So stay tuned.
We'll be right back after a short break.
Yeah, see you soon.
Okay, welcome back to our deep dive into the world of dental materials.
We left off talking about digital impressions, which are pretty amazing.
Yeah, they're like the future of dentistry. But let's bring things back down to earth a little bit and talk about what happens after the impression is taken. I mean, you have this gooey mold of your teeth, but how does it actually become a solid model?
That's where gypsum comes in.
Gypsum.
Yep. It's a mineral that's been used for centuries to make dental models.
Is that like plaster?
It is similar to plaster. Gypsum is a naturally occurring mineral, and when it's heated and ground into a powder, it has this remarkable ability to harden when mixed with water. It's been used in construction and art for ages. And in dentistry, it's indispensable. We use it to create those models that we use to diagnose, plan treatment, and even make restorations.
So it's kind of like the dental equivalent of clay.
You could say that, but it's not just one type of gypsum. There are different types, each with its own specific properties and uses. It's like choosing the right wood for a project.
Okay, so what are the different types of gypsum used in dentistry? And how does the dentist choose the right one for the job?
Well, the most basic type is model plaster. Sometimes it's called plaster of Paris. It's the least expensive and the weakest type of gypsum, so it's perfect for making those initial diagnostic casts.
Diagnostic casts.
Yeah, those are the ones that give us a general overview of your teeth, your bite, that kind of thing. They're used to assess your overall dental health and spot any potential issues.
Got it. So model plaster is like the rough draft of dental models.
Exactly. And because they don't need to be super strong, model plaster is a great choice because it's so cost effective.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about when you need something a bit more heavy duty?
Then we use dental stone. It's stronger and more durable than model plaster.
Okay.
And we use it to create what we call working casts, which are used to plan treatments and make appliances.
Like dentures and retainers.
Exactly. Dental stone also reproduces finer details, which is super important when you're making those precise models.
Okay, so we've got model plaster for the initial assessments and dental stone for the more detailed work. But what about those super precise procedures like making crowns and bridges? Do they use dental stone for that too?
Well, for those really intricate procedures, we use a type of gypsum called high-strength stone, or sometimes it's called dye stone.
Dye stone.
Yeah, it's the strongest and most accurate type of gypsum. It's capable of capturing even the tiniest details.
Wow, so that's like the Cadillac of gypsum.
You could say that. High-strength stone is essential for making what we call dies, which are exact replicas of individual teeth. And we use those dies to make crowns, bridges, and other restorations that need to fit absolutely perfectly.
Okay, so we've got our three main types of gypsum model: plaster, dental stone, and high-strength stone, each with its own strengths and uses.
You got it.
But how do these powders actually become those solid models we see in the dental office?
It's actually a pretty fascinating process. Remember those impressions we were talking about earlier?
The gooey ones?
Yep, those. Once the impression material sets, we carefully remove it from the mouth, and that creates a negative mold of the teeth and gums. And then we fill that negative mold with the chosen gypsum product.
Oh, I see. So it's like pouring batter into a cake mold.
That's a great analogy. But unlike baking a cake, there are some very specific techniques we use when pouring gypsum to make sure we get a smooth, bubble-free model.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this gypsum pouring process. What are some of the key steps?
Well, the first step is all about getting the right consistency. We have to carefully measure the water and powder according to the manufacturer's instructions.
So it's kind of like a recipe.
Exactly. Too much water, and the model will be weak and prone to breaking. Too little water, and it won't flow properly into all the details of the impression.
So it's all about finding that perfect balance.
Right. Once we have the right water-to-powder ratio, we slowly sprinkle the powder into the water while mixing it with a spatula, or better yet, a mechanical mixer.
I'm guessing the mechanical mixer helps get rid of those pesky air bubbles?
You got it. It creates a much smoother, more consistent mix.
Okay, so once you have a nice smooth gypsum mixture, what happens next?
We carefully pour the mixture into the impression, starting at one end, and we gently vibrate it to help the gypsum flow into all the little nooks and crannies and to eliminate any trapped air bubbles.
So those air bubbles are a problem here too.
Oh yeah. If we have air bubbles in the model, they can create voids or imperfections, and that can affect the accuracy of the final restoration.
Got it. So how long does it take for the gypsum to harden into a solid model?
The initial setting time for most gypsum products is around 8–10 minutes, but it takes about an hour for the model to reach its full strength.
Okay.
Once it's set, we carefully peel away the impression material and voila, we have a positive replica of the teeth.
It's like magic. But those models are usually pretty rough looking when they first come out of the mold, right?
That's true. They need a little bit of TLC before they're ready for their close-up. The next step is trimming the model.
Trimming. So you give the model a haircut.
Something like that. We use special tools and techniques to shape the base of the model and refine the anatomical portion, which is the part that replicates the teeth and gums.
So it's not just about making it look pretty. There's a functional reason for trimming too.
Absolutely. Trimming is all about making sure the model is stable, symmetrical, and accurately represents the patient's bite. It's a very precise process that requires a keen eye and a steady hand.
Okay, let's talk about the trimming process. What are some of the key steps involved in going from that rough model to a polished masterpiece?
The first step is creating a stable base. The base of the model needs to be flat and parallel to the occlusal plane, which is the imaginary line that runs along the biting surfaces of the teeth.
So it's like laying a level foundation.
Exactly. A stable base is essential for making sure the model sits properly on the articulator.
The articulator.
Oh, right. That's a device that simulates the movements of the jaw.
Okay. What about the anatomical portion? How do you trim that?
We trim the anatomical portion to expose. We trim the anatomical portion to expose those important landmarks, like the cusp tips of the teeth and the gingival margins. That's the line where the teeth meet the gums.
Okay.
We also trim it to create a smooth and symmetrical shape that accurately reflects the contours of the teeth and gums.
So it's like sculpting the teeth out of the gypsum.
Yeah, kind of. The goal is to create a model that's not only aesthetically pleasing, nice to look at, but also accurate and informative. It's a blend of art and science, really.
It sounds like trimming is a crucial step, and it takes a lot of skill and precision. But with all this emphasis on perfection, what happens if something goes wrong? I mean, these materials are being handled by humans, after all, and we all make mistakes.
You're right. Even the most experienced dental professionals can run into problems when working with these materials. It happens.
So what do you do when things go sideways?
That's where troubleshooting comes in.
Troubleshooting.
Yeah.
So it's like being a dental detective.
Exactly. You have to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. So let's start with some common problems that can happen with alginate impressions. One of the biggest culprits is air bubbles.
Oh yeah, those pesky air bubbles. We talked about them during the pouring process, but they can be a problem with the impressions themselves too, right?
That's right. Air bubbles in the impression can create voids or imperfections in the model, and that can throw off the accuracy of the restoration.
So how do those air bubbles get in there in the first place?
Well, they can get trapped during mixing if the alginate isn't mixed thoroughly enough.
Okay.
Or they can form if the tree isn't seated properly in the mouth, which can create air pockets.
So it's all about technique and attention to detail. What can you do to prevent air bubbles from ruining the impression?
Well, Proper mixing technique is key. The alginate needs to be mixed really well to get rid of any air pockets, and the tray needs to be seated firmly and evenly in the mouth so the alginate flows into all the right spots.
And what if you do end up with air bubbles? Is it a total do-over?
Sometimes, if the air bubbles are small, we can fill them in with wax or a similar material.
Oh,
But if the voids are large, it can compromise the accuracy of the impression, and we might have to retake it. So it's always best to aim for a bubble-free impression right from the start.
good advice. What about tears in the alginate? Those seem pretty disastrous.
Tears can happen for a few reasons. Sometimes the alginate is mixed too thin, or maybe the tray is removed too quickly.
Oh, I see.
Or sometimes there are undercuts in the teeth that catch the alginate as it's being pulled out.
So how can you prevent those tears from happening?
Choosing the right tray size is important.
Right.
And making sure the alginate is the right consistency. And when we remove the tray, we do it with a smooth, steady motion to reduce the risk of tearing.
Makes sense. What about those times when the alginate sets too quickly or too slowly? What causes that, and how can you adjust it?
The setting time can be affected by a few things. The temperature of the water, how it's mixed, even the humidity in the room.
Wow, so it's like baking, where even small changes in the environment can impact the outcome.
You got it. If it's setting too fast, we can use cooler water or mix for a shorter time.
Right.
And if it's setting too slowly, we can use warmer water or mix for a little longer.
It's all about finding that Goldilocks zone, right? Not too fast, not too slow, just right.
Exactly. Now let's move on to gypsum models. What are some common problems we might encounter there?
Okay.
Well, air bubbles can be a problem with the models too, not just the impressions.
Ugh, those air bubbles just won't quit.
I know, right? They can show up if the gypsum isn't mixed properly or if it's not vibrated enough during pouring.
So how do you prevent them?
Again, it's all about technique.
Hmm.
We mix the gypsum thoroughly, vibrate it gently while pouring, and make sure the impression is free of air bubbles before we even start pouring.
Okay, so air bubbles are public enemy number one.
Mm-hmm.
What about other things? Like sometimes I've seen models that have a rough or uneven surface. What causes that?
Surface irregularities can be caused by a few things. Maybe the gypsum wasn't mixed properly,
Okay.
or maybe the bowl or spatula wasn't completely clean.
Oh, right.
Even incorporating air into the mixture while pouring can cause problems.
So cleanliness and attention to detail are really important.
Absolutely. It's essential to use clean equipment, mix the gypsum thoroughly, and avoid introducing air into the mix while pouring.
Okay, good to know. What about cracks or fractures in the model? Those seem pretty serious.
Cracks or fractures can happen if the model is dropped or handled too roughly, or if it's exposed to too much heat or moisture.
So they're kind of delicate.
Well, they need to be handled with care, that's for sure. Proper handling and storage are essential.
Okay, so it sounds like there are a lot of things that can go wrong when you're working with these materials. But I'm guessing you've developed some pretty good troubleshooting skills over the years, right?
You learn a few tricks along the way. But sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to prevent it in the first place. That's why it's so important to follow proper procedures, use high-quality materials, and pay attention to every detail.
Absolutely. It's all about being meticulous and taking pride in your work.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's about creating a model that will help the dentist provide the best possible care for the patient.
Well said. And speaking of providing the best possible care, let's talk about another essential dental material, wax. Yep. I know it doesn't sound very exciting, but dental wax plays a surprisingly important role in a lot of different procedures.
Oh, you're right. It's kind of an unsung hero in dentistry.
So tell me, what exactly is dental wax used for?
Well, there are actually different types of dental wax, and they're used for a variety of purposes.
Okay, break it down for me.
One category is pattern waxes. These are used to create patterns for castings like crowns, inlays, and onlays.
So the wax is kind of like a prototype for the final restoration.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. One of the most common pattern waxes is inlay wax, which is used to create those precise patterns for inlays, onlays, and crowns.
Okay, what else?
Then there are processing waxes. Those are used in, various laboratory and clinical procedures.
Give me some examples.
Sure. Boxing wax is used to form the base of a model when we're pouring gypsum. And utility wax is used for all sorts of things, like extending impression trays or adapting orthodontic appliances.
So processing waxes are kind of like the multi-tools of dentistry.
Exactly. And finally, we have impression waxes.
Impression waxes. Don't we already have all those fancy impression materials we talked about earlier?
We do, but impression waxes have some very specific uses. Like corrective impression wax is used to, correct imperfections in an impression. And bite registration wax is used to record the relationship between the upper and lower teeth.
So it's like fine-tuning the bite.
Yep. And there's also a type of impression wax called base plate wax, which is used to make those temporary base plates for dentures.
Wow, so wax is a lot more versatile than I thought.
Yeah.
But what makes it so useful for all these different applications?
Well, dental waxes have some unique properties that make them ideal for working in the mouth.
Like what?
For one thing, they have a specific melting range, so they're solid at room temperature but soften and become moldable when heated. And they flow really well, so they can be adapted to different shapes.
Okay.
And once they cool down, they harden and hold their shape really well. They also have minimal shrinkage, so we can be confident that the wax pattern will accurately represent the final restoration.
So they're kind of like the chameleon of dental materials.
Haha, I like that. They can adapt and transform to fit whatever needs we have.
Okay, this has been really eye-opening. I never realized how much goes on behind the scenes in dentistry, or how many different materials are involved in even the simplest procedures.
I know, right? It's a fascinating field.
Yeah.
And we're constantly learning and innovating.
It seems like the future of dentistry is all about, well, the future. Digital impressions, biomaterials, all that cool stuff. It's amazing to think about what's on the horizon.
It really is. But even with all these advancements, the fundamentals of dentistry remain the same. It's all about using our knowledge, our skills, and these amazing materials to help people achieve and maintain healthy, beautiful smiles.
Well said. It's been a pleasure diving into the world of dental materials with you. And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. Maybe next time you're at the dentist, you can strike up a conversation about the materials they're using. Who knows? You might learn something new. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey, exploring the world of dental materials, from their ancient history to modern-day techniques like taking impressions and making those gypsum models.
It's been quite a ride. And speaking of modern dentistry, we were talking about digital impressions before the break.
Right, those digital impressions, they're like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Mm-hmm.
But how do they actually fit into the bigger picture of, real-world dentistry?
Well, they're not just a fancy gadget. They're really changing the way we do things. Remember we talked about accuracy being so important for things like crowns and bridges?
Yeah, those restorations need to fit perfectly, not just for them to work right, but for them to look natural too.
Exactly. And digital impressions take accuracy to a whole new level. They eliminate so many of the things that can cause problems with traditional impressions, like, the setting time of the materials, distortion when you're removing the tray, and even those pesky air bubbles.
So it's like having a high-definition, three-dimensional blueprint of your mouth. And the dentist can use that to design and make restorations with incredible precision.
That's a great way to put it. But it goes beyond just precision. Digital impressions also streamline the entire process. Think back to how we talked about sending those traditional impressions off to a lab, and then there's that waiting period for the models to be made.
Right. It seemed like a bit of a slow process.
Well, with digital impressions, the dentist can send the digital file to the lab electronically, almost instantly.
Wow, that's much faster.
And then the lab can create the models using CAD/CAM technology, so everything moves much quicker.
CAD/CAM.
Computer-aided design and manufacturing.
Right. So faster turnaround times for patients and less back and forth between the dentist and the lab. It's a win-win.
Exactly. It's more accurate, it's faster, and it's a less messy experience for the patient. But I'm sure you're thinking, all this high-tech wizardry must come with a pretty high price tag, right?
Whoa, yeah, that was my next question. Is it super expensive?
It can be a significant investment for dental practices, that's true, but as the technology becomes more common, the costs are starting to come down.
Yeah.
So it's becoming more accessible to dentists and patients.
That's great news. So it's another example of how technology is really pushing dentistry forward.
Absolutely.
But digital impressions are just one piece of the puzzle. What other cool advancements are happening in the world of dental materials?
Oh, the field is constantly evolving. Researchers are always working on new materials that are stronger, more durable, more aesthetically pleasing. And one area that's really exciting is biomaterials.
Biomaterials, what are those?
Those are materials that can actually interact with the body in really amazing ways.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Think about materials that can actually stimulate the body to regenerate tissues, like, for example, bone grafting materials that can encourage new bone growth.
Wow, so it's not just about replacing missing teeth, it's about helping the body actually heal and rebuild itself.
Exactly. And there are studies going on right now looking at materials that can release growth factors to help gum tissues heal and even regenerate damaged nerves.
That's incredible. It
Exactly.
seems like the future of dentistry is heading towards more personalized regenerative solutions. It's really exciting to think about. But before we get too carried away with the future, let's take a moment to appreciate how far we've come.
We've come a long way from those ancient remedies like seashells and animal teeth, haven't we? Now we have these incredibly sophisticated materials that can mimic the look and feel of natural teeth and even help the body heal itself.
It's mind-blowing. What started as a simple exploration of the materials in our mouths turned into this amazing journey through history, science, and technology. And it's all thanks to those unsung heroes, the dental materials.
That's right. And it's a journey that's far from over. The field of dental materials is constantly changing and evolving, always pushing forward to find better ways to care for our oral health.
Well said. So the next time you're in the dental chair, take a moment to think about those materials that are working hard to keep your smile healthy and beautiful. And don't be shy about asking your dentist about them. The more you know, the better equipped you are to take charge of your own oral health.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure diving into the world of dental materials with you.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, and we hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Thanks for tuning in.